At the end of the last episode, my dad and I had just finished making the main hoop, so we're going to start this one by making the necessary floor plates that are required in order to fit the roll cage to the car.
Once again, we have to refer back to the rule book. Now, as you can imagine, any racing body has a list of do's and don'ts when it comes to building your cage, and ours is no exception. Our rules state that the cage must be fully welded together and fully welded to the car. That means you can't use a bolting kit or even weld a bolting kit into your car. It specifically says that in our rules, which is hence the reason why we're having to build ours from scratch. It also states that everywhere that the cage anchors to the car must have an 8-inch thick spreader plate, and it must be a minimum of 24 square inches. I've got this sheet, which is 8 inch. You've probably seen me using it to make other brackets and things for the car. So we're going to get this marked up and make the 6 spreader plates that we need. Now I've got a bit of a verbal agreement with my neighbours on how late I can use power tools, and as you can see it's going dark, so I'm fast approaching that. So I'm going to crack on with this as quick as I can.
Well, the rules state that the spreader plates have to be a minimum of 24 square inches. It never said what shape they had to be. For the design of our cage, there are actually 3 different shapes. 2 3 by 7.5 inch in the rear, 2 4 by 6 at the front, and 2 5 by 5 inch under the main hoop in the middle. Please note that the rules state minimum size. There is no maximum. The plates all cut out, I use the flat wheel and deburred all the edges, as well as clean them up ready to be welded.
Right, once again we have to refer back to the rule books about where we can put spreader plates and we can attach the cage. And one of the rules is that the basically backstays that go from the main hoop to the rear here can't go beyond the back edge of the tyre. It also strongly recommends that you anchor it into places on the strut tower or into rear seat mounts because they're usually reinforced parts of the chassis. This area here very nicely with my design basically puts the backstay at 45 degrees, which is ideal for what we want. It's also quite reinforced because there are multiple pieces of metal. So what I'm going to do now is take the wire wheel and the grinder, get rid of all the seam sealant, and then probably have to attack this piece of sand bending with a chisel or something, and then we can start contouring the plate to get it in here so we can weld it. Now, this is going to be messy and probably pretty loud, so I think cue the music and a time lapse.
To help contour the plates to the rear arch, I put some pencil marks on the spreader plate to indicate where I needed to bend it. I wish I had a more elegant way to bend 3mm thick plate, but I don't, so all of this had to be done with hammers and a vise.
Right, this is one of the few times I'm actually going to bother painting something on this project, mainly because if I don't paint this and it rusts out from underneath it, it's going to be an absolute pig to repair. I may only be racing this car once, but other people after me might be, so out of a bit of a courtesy to them, I'm going to hit this with some weld-through primer.
The area prepped for welding and the spreader plate bent as much as I could to conform with the shape of the car, I began to tack weld it in place everywhere it came into contact with the bodywork. With the plate tack welded into place, it was then time to break out the hammers again and start hammering the plate into shape so it matched up to the car. With both rear spreader plates tacked in place and hammered into shape, I then just had to fully weld them in. The rules state that the plates must be fully welded all the way around, so as I was welding to thin sheet metal, my welds had to be made up of short runs moving around the plate to avoid burning through. I've learnt my lesson before when welding to thin sheet metal. If you start to burn through, stop, let everything cool down, and then go back and fill in your hole. Don't try and keep going, you're just going to make the problem worse.
Next thing I really need to do is trim the ends of these to the correct length and also to the correct shape so that they can be welded to the floor. And when we weld it directly to the floor, they are onto spreader plates, which I've got to fit. In order to fit the spreader plates though, I need to get rid of some of the sound insulation. And so we're going to solve it with fire.
Now I know someone is going to say I should have used dry ice to remove all the sound deadening. Two reasons I didn't do that. One, I didn't have time, and the other one is I couldn't actually find a local supplier of dry ice. While not ideal, a blowtorch, a scraper and wire roller and an angle grinder will do an adequate job. With the sound deadening removed on both sides, I once again marked on the spreader plates where to bend them. These ones didn't require as much bending as the rear ones, and in places it was actually easier to hammer the floor to meet the spreader plate rather than bending the spreader plate to match the floor.
Now, according to our governing body, all joints in the roll cage have to be fully welded. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, because if you don't, and the bar comes loose, in the event of an accident, you're going to potentially become a human shish kebab. Anyway, in order to do the joints where the front, left and right bars meet the main hoop, I need to be able to get the mid gun in, and unfortunately due to the height of one of my teammates, this roll cage has had to be made to tuck up right up to the roof, meaning I really can't get my welder in there. There are a few solutions to this. One, you can set holes in the roof and mid gun in that way. Unfortunately that's not really an option for us though, because we do need this car to remain weather tight. The next is you build the upper box structure like this. As you can see, I even went to the effort of CAD modelling this one. Now the idea behind this is that this mounts into your sill and you weld your cage together with it down on the floor of the car. You're going to lift it up, slide these underneath and weld them out. I went to the effort of contacting our governing body because they didn't say you could do this in the rules, but didn't say you couldn't, and they did give me exemption. There were a few caveats with it. However, after starting to bend up the tubing and take on some more accurate measurements of the car, I realised that this is probably a bit overkill for what we want to do. So what we are going to do is drill some dirty great holes through the floor, and where we need to, drop the hoop through them down to the ground. And that should give me probably about 6 inches worth of room between the roof and the top, so I can weld them. And once we've done that, we can lift everything back up, slide the floor plates in and fully weld them. I wouldn't recommend doing this if you're building a roll cage for high-end Porsche, but for a £395 roader, I think this is perfectly fine.
With the positions of the main hoop worked out, I marked where I needed to drill and then took the hole saw to the car. Don't worry if you don't have the exact size of hole saw for your roll cage tubing, as long as it's smaller than your spreader plate and larger than the tube diameter, it'll be fine. Also, if you're going to use this method, make sure to check under the car to ensure you aren't about to cut through anything important like a brake or fuel line. Fortunately for me, there was nothing directly below on the Rover, so I was fine to do this.
The floor plate's bent up and the holes drilled through the floor. I was able to put the whole hoop in and mark where it needs to be cut at the bottom. However, because we had to bend the floor plates a bit, the cut at the bottom of the roll cage tubing is not going to be straight, and therefore need to figure out the profile of exactly where it's going to sit. Now these plates keep moving around a little bit despite how close I've got them to fit to the floor, so what I'm going to do is place a solitary tack weld at each one of them so that they don't move. Obviously when you place tack welds, make sure you put them in somewhere that if you need to, you can get a grinder in to grind them out. I know full well that I will have to get these out, because I'm going to have to slide the plates out afterwards and drop the cage through the holes in the floor to weld the top of it, so I'm making sure that I put it somewhere along the front, preferably on the front inner corner.
This is a tube programming tool, and I'm going to be honest, this is a home design built one. I did have a look around online. There are some very nice ones out there which are kind of pricey. I found one that was much cheaper. I'm not going to name and shame the company, however, when I started reading into the description, it turns out you've got to provide your own TIG welding rods to make the little bars that go in it, and your own rubber band. Then on even closer inspection on the photo, notice the plastic bit in the middle that they were providing was just a 3D printed piece. Now I have access to SolidWorks and an industrial 3D printer, so it seemed kind of daft it did to pay quite a bit of money for what was a very relatively easy part that I could make myself. Therefore I did. My dad very kindly drilled all the holes out in it for me, and I went and put the TIG rods in one evening while I was watching TV. Anyway, for this done, I can now basically figure out what the shape of the bottom of the tube, the main hoop, need to be, and then I can transfer this next to it and cut the tube.
I started by marking out the centre point of where the main hoop tubing would sit, and then some marks that I could align the profiling tool with to ensure that I got the correct orientation. With those marks placed, all I then had to do was align the profiling tool and push it down into the spreader plate to get the shape needed to cut the bottom of the main hoop too. To the end of the tube cut to shape, I ran the flat wheel around it to deburr it and then cleaned it up ready for welding. When I had the main hoop out of the car and access to them, I marked the centre points of each of the upper bends. This is so I had a reference mark to line up other parts of the roll cage later on. The ends of the tube cut to the correct shape and the centre of the upper bends marked, I got the main hoop back into the car and tack welded it in place. Unfortunately, I missed the actual moment of me welding it. However, I made sure to place those tack welds where I could get a grinder into them, as I knew I was going to have to cut them out later. To keep the main hoop in the correct position, the next bars to make were the rear diagonals. Our governing body's rules state that the rear bars have to connect to the main hoop within a certain distance of the top and from the side, and should ideally be angled as close to 45 degrees as possible. By joining the main hoop in the centre of the top bends, I was well within these measurements, was almost smack bang on 45 degrees, and had just enough space at the top to get the mid-gun in to fully weld them. To help figure out the angles of the notches that needed to be cut, I ran a length of string from the main hoop to the rear spreader plate and aligned the tube profiling tool along it. With the ends of the tube notched correctly, it was then just a case of putting it in the car and tack welding it into position. I only tack welded it as I knew once again I was going to have to remove it. With the one of the rear diagonals made and tacked in place, it was then just a case of rinse and repeat to make the other side. The next tube to go in was a diagonal in the main hoop. Now this is a mandatory tube that has to go from a top corner to the opposite bottom one, and it must be a single piece. There is nothing particularly remarkable about this tube, it is just a straight piece with ends notched and was made in very much the same way as the rear diagonal braces. The only interesting thing about this tube though is that when I first made my CAD model of the roll cage, I followed a little diagram in our governing body's rulebook and had the tube going from the top left to the bottom right. I then realised that that diagram was made on the assumption we would be racing a left-hand drive car. We however will be one, if not the only, right-hand drive car on track. Now while the rules don't actually state which way the tube has to go, consensus on the internet seems to say that it should go from above the driver's head to the opposite corner. So, as to not have any issues during tech inspection, I flipped the tube round. The main hoop diagonal made, I once again tack welded it in place, making sure, as always, to place a tack weld somewhere I could get the grinder to, as I knew I was going to have to take this tube out once again. With the main hoop diagonal in place, the next piece to make was the harness bar, and once again I had to refer back to the rulebook as there are regulations as to where this bar can be fitted. A 5 or 6 point harness like the one we have to install in the car has the shoulder straps wrapped around the tube, which is called the harness bar. When installed, the shoulder straps of the harness must be angled down between 0 and 15 degrees. To ensure we were compliant with this, I set the harness bar approximately half an inch below the holes in the rear of the seat. As there was no height adjustment in our seat, this meant that the harness was always angled slightly downwards when the seat was all the way up against the cage, as our tallest driver would need it, and when pulled forwards would cause the shoulder straps to flatten out, getting closer and closer to horizontal, but never actually getting there. I started the harness bar by once again marking out its position using a length of string. The following morning, after taking some measurements, I marked up the tube and cut the notch for the one end. I have to say, the notch profiling tool really was a worthwhile thing to make. The smoke you can see coming out of the end of the tube was caused by the nest of some little critter that had decided to make its home inside of my roll cage tubing, setting on fire. Fortunately, whatever it was had since left the tube, and I suppose that teaches me for leaving my tubing outside. With the notches cut, I tacked the tube in place, which unfortunately I missed on camera.
Last night I got the harness bar tacked in. I do still need to do the other side, but that can wait. It was wet and dark, so I didn't really want to get camera gear out, and you wouldn't have seen a lot, so I had to crack on with it. My dad is going to be back over today though to help us with the main bars that go from down here up to the cage. Involves obviously using tube bender again. Before I do that though, I need to put floor spreader plates. Again, these are mandatory. They've got to be a minimum of 24 square inches. These are 4x6. I've figured out where it's going to go on that side, so I've just got to transfer my measurements, and then it's a case of burning off the sound deadening, grinding the paint back, and get these tacked in. I think they may need a little bit of contouring as well to the floor.
The sound deadening removed some footwells and marked the spreader plates up as they needed a little massaging to fit the floor. With the spreader plate bent up, I began tack welding it to the car and hammering it into shape. Before I could get it completed though, my dad arrived to help me bend up the left and right hand bars for the cage. The left and right bars of the roll cage only had two bends in them, however unlike the main hoop, these bends were not on the same plane. Not only did they have to bend backwards to follow the shape of the rover's A-pillar, they also had to bend in slightly towards the centre of the car. Fortunately, these angles could be figured out from the SOLIDWORKS model I created of the roll cage. The setup for the first bend was simple enough and was just the same as all the bends in the main hoop. The second one, however, well, that was quite a bit more tricky. First thing to do to make the second bend was to ensure the tube went back into the bender vertically. In a minute you'll see me clamp a piece of angle iron to the tube and stick a magnetic angle finder to it. It took us to this point in the build of the roll cage to realise it would have been a good idea to do this before taking the tube out of the bender. Anyway, with the tube back in the bender and vertical, I watched the angle finder and my dad pulled the tube over to achieve the correct angle. Unfortunately, once again my GoPro stopped recording, so we missed the bit where we actually bent the tube. I really need to keep an eye on my batteries more.
So I've gone and got the floor plates welded in. It was a bit of an awkward job on this side considering how rusty the car is. And my dad has gone and got this bar, the other one that you can see on the lawn, all bent up. So what I've got to do now is kind of trim it to length, and then I get to spend some time tube notching it to get these in place.
With the tube cut to length, my dad and I got it into the car so we could mark the orientation of the tube notches and check that we'd got the bends right. To be honest, we probably should have done that first before bending the second one up. The tube notches figured out, it was then just a case of marking them and then cutting them out. Unfortunately, just after we cut the notch, the rain came in, so we had to quickly pack everything away, including my camera gear. I really need to find myself a bigger garage so I can work inside. Anyway, later that evening during a break from the rain, I got the tube tacked in place.
Right, to give you a bit of an update, I went and welded in both the floor plates. You'll find the welder there. Obviously, you see I had temporarily take the seat out, right below me. And my dad and I got that front bar in there. I'm going to be honest, that took us a lot longer to do than we expected. However, we did actually bend up the other one as well. Now, the bars ended up about a 1/4 inch further back. We didn't get the notch at the top quite right. Like shorten it, but that's not an issue. We've got space. So today's plan is to try and get the other one done, although the weather outside is absolutely delightful. We had to leave the bent tube outside because it won't fit in the garage. First thing I'm going to do though, before my dad turns up a bit later, is try and finish off the harness bar, because to do the bar on this side, that diagonal has actually got to come out. It'll get welded back in afterwards. I probably will have to do just the tube notch at the top there a little bit, get it back in, but I can deal with that later. But yeah, let's get this harness bar finished.
The creation of this bar was nothing special and was the usual case of using the tube profiling tool to get the shape, marking it out on the tube and cutting the notches. As it was not a particularly big piece, I was able to make it out the remainder of the test bend we did in the last episode. I did however make a mistake with this tube, as it's not technically the harness bar and is instead referred to as the anti-bow bar in our governing bodies rulebook. Another mistake I made was thinking that this tube was required. It turns out while this tube is recommended, it isn't actually mandatory according to the rulebook, so if you wanted to, you could save yourself some time and money and not bother making it. But at this point though, I'd got a lot faster at cutting tube notches, and as it was made from an offcut, I don't see this as a waste of my time. Anyway, with my dad returning, I left finishing the anti-bow bar till later on and returned to working on the right hand side tube.
Well, it's been raining most of this morning, so to be honest, I've not really had the cameras out because everything's getting wet. It's been horrible. We've got a bit of a break in the rain now. My dad and I have cut the bar that go in here to length. It probably just needs a little bit of fettling on that notch in the end. As you can see, I've taken the rear diagonal out. The reason that's come out is because of the order that this has to be welded together. With it in place, I couldn't drop the main hoop to the floor to weld the top mounts. I always kind of knew that, but due to when I could get help, obviously I had to crack on with what I could. The only issue we found, trying to get this bar in at the minute, is we are clashing with this. Now, it probably should fit with it in place, but getting it physically in place then is a bit of an issue. So that brace is going to come out. Now, I had actually always planned to take it out anyway and tie this mount into the roll cage anyway, so it's not really any big loss. So I'm going to set my camera up on the tripod again and grab some spanners and get this out.
While I got the steering column support removed and the right side bar in, my dad got the bar that goes across the top of the windscreen marked out ready for me to cut. With the tube cut to length, it then just needed notching at both ends. As the tube was straight and the cage as near as we can make it symmetrical, this was quite easy as both notches on the ends were the same. For the tube notched, I got it tack welded into position, and this is the last of the bars that would be tack welded in place for some time.
Right, well my dad and I have got the two side bars in there and the one that goes across the top of the windscreen. So now to fully weld all these, I've got to cut the tacks out and take these bars out, and then the ones at the bottom of the main hoop and the plates, and then we should be able to drop this through the floor through those holes I drilled earlier.
Now, I mentioned it before in the episode, and I think even in the previous one, but this is where little forward planning really paid off. I made sure that all my tack welds were in places I could reach with a grinder without having to take massive chunks out of the roll cage tubing and spread a plate for the car. As you can see, it did not take me much effort to get the rear diagonals out. The rear diagonals out, I then cut the tack cord that held the main hoop to the spreader plate and the spreader plates to the car. Well, this episode has gone on long enough, so I'm going to end it here, leaving you with my dad and I dropping the cage to the floor so I could access the top of it to fully weld. Come back next time to see the completion of the roll cage. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please hit that like button and share. If you want to stay up to date with the build, then please hit that subscribe button and remember to turn on notifications so you get told when new episodes come out. And finally, if you want to watch more episodes in this build series, then please click the link that should be on screen now. Once again, thanks for watching.